Welcome back. I am Pastor Doug. We now continue with part 86 in our series entitled A Survey of Paul's Letter to the Romans. Christian discipleship is like life in a goldfish bowl. Very little can happen without it being observed by those who take note. If you walk the walk, as well as you talk the talk. There are times when we may be out of view from angelic and human observation, but we are never out of sight of God. We know we are on the road to spiritual maturity when we do what is right, even if we were to be the only one who would ever know. Know that vengeance is God's domain and that he will repay. Romans 12:17 and 19. Interpersonal peace cannot be sustained without genuine forgiveness. Genuine forgiveness means that the matter is never to be brought up again. Placing something on the back burner only to bring it forward again at a later time is not forgiveness. When God forgives, the sin is put as far from us as the east is from the west, and he remembers our sin no more. This is the type of forgiveness that a disciple is to have and exhibit towards the ones who offends him or her. Genuine forgiveness cannot exist as long as the offended one is seeking personal revenge, even if only it exists in the privacy of our souls. In Romans 12:18, Paul tells us that as much as possible, we are to live in peace with everyone. It is worth noting that the issue of peace and the forgiveness it demands is inserted between the command not to seek revenge and the principle that vengeance is God's domain and that he will repay. When the agape, A-G-A-P-E, love of God is being exercised, the offended one, quote, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, end quote, of 1 Corinthians 13:5. When the hurt is allowed to pass by the agape love filter and strikes its intended target, such offenses should be promptly resolved by way of a confession and an apology that are responded with an act of forgiveness. It takes a spiritually mature person to confess an offense, and it takes an even more spiritually mature believer who has been deeply offended to allow the situation to be so promptly resolved. Whatever future consequence there may be, they are left in the hands of God. When this is not possible, or an apology is not offered, the offended party can still forgive the offender in his or her own soul. You may be perceived to be a fool in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of God, the fool is the one who does not acknowledge God or his ways. Committing the sin of refusing to forgive others will lead to bitterness of soul and will disable the production of divine good in the life of the one who has been offended by others. Whatever future actions that an offense may warrant, it is clear that personal revenge is not to be among them. Testifying truthfully in a criminal or civil procedure is not taking personal revenge. Law enforcement authorities, eyewitnesses, experts, and victims of crime have moral and legal obligations to testify in such proceedings in order to have the offender answer to society for the crimes they commit. It has been my personal experience that as I grow in God's grace, I take no pleasure in seeing others who have offended me suffer for it. I would rather pray that God would extend to them as much mercy and grace as He has shown me after the many times that I have offended Him. Where would any one of us be if God allowed the full consequences of all our negative choices to manifest themselves? God has sanctioned the administration of criminal justice and the settling of civil disputes by the methods established in the varying systems of government. Should these systems fail, the offended is challenged to leave the matter in the direct hands of God and then move on. Philippians 3:13. When we choose to dwell on all the injustices there are in the devil's world, Satan will use such opportunities to generate doubt concerning the reality and significance of God and all the things of God. Instead, the advancing disciple will learn to bless the ones that come against him or her. In Romans 12:20, we read, "If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in doing so, you will heap coals on his head." There are two interpretations or applications of meaning of the heaping coals on the head phrase. Some interpret this to mean that the enemy will feel ashamed, and perhaps this may resolve ongoing or future hostilities. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 22. The second interpretation or application is that a neighbor is to be given aid in the time of personal need. If the fire inside one's home went out in the ancient world, the occupants would be without heat and the means to prepare food. Hot coals from the fire inside a neighbor's home would be carried in a heat-resistant pot on the head of the servant to the neighbor in need. This, too, may serve to end or prevent future hostilities and promote peace. In either scenario, the objective is made clear in the next verse or sentence of chapter 12 of Paul's letter to the Romans. There, in Romans 12:21, we read, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Keeping it in context with the entire section of Scripture, Paul is telling us to overcome the evil that is done against us by doing good to or for the one or ones that come against us, be it now or sometime in the future.